Dear students, Assalamu alaikum to everyone. I hope everyone will be fine and well. And this is the last session but, about an apology to poetry. And before I start this last session, this is a recorded lesson. This recorded session. So I wanted to tell you that, this topic is included for your final term examination, and I hope you will study this topic very deeply and clearly, and you will form your better understanding about this topic. Because I believe this is one of the most important topic, and I have already conducted three sessions on this topic in apology for poetry, and I tried my best to explain each and every concept which is presented in this topic, and I tried my best to explain each and everything from different aspects that you can form your understanding that everything should be understood on your part. So see Veda, now it's up to you. Now it's up to you that how you are going to study at home and how you are going to deal with this topic, because I believe this is one of the most important topic included in your course outline. So Veda, without further delay, now let me share my PPT with all of you. That Yes, but I hope now the PPT would be visible to all of you. So see, Veda, we were discussing the slide, and this slide is about some different beliefs of Sydney than Plato and Aristotle. Actually, in this topic, in Apology for Poetry, we have studied that how um, Stephen Gosson has a take on poetry on the basis of four grounds. Okay, now we also know and we have also studied the Drake of Poetry by Plato, and then we studied that what is the defense of poetry by Aristotle in his Poetics. So we are quite familiar with those points, that how Plato had a take on the poetry and then how Aristotle had defended the poetry on those three grounds. Now here we have studied that how Stephen has just Gosson just had attacked on the poetry on the basis of these four grounds, and then how Philip Sidney just defended poetry on the basis of those four grounds on which the poetry was attacked at the first place. So here during this attack and defend, whether it was between the Aristotle and Plato, or it is between the Stephen and Philip Sidney. So we discussed the concept of imitation as well. We discussed the concept of imitation when we were studying the topic, which was poetics. So we know that what is the concept of imitation, which is given by Plato, and what is the concept of imitation, which is explained by Aristotle. Now here we are gonna talk about the concept of imitation, which is explained by Philip Sidney. So here, actually, first of all, for Sidney, art is imitation of nature. You see here, Sidney says that art is the imitation of nature. That means the whatever the nature is, that is truth, that is reality, and the art is imitation, the copy of that nature. Now similarly, Plato says that art is an imitation. Whatever the imitation is there, that's art. So art is an imitation. And now here you can see that how he just Sidney says that, and if you remember that we had studied the two types of the arts by Plato, and I'm not going in those details, that we just talked that there is a useful art and the second is imitative art. These are the two types of arts which are suggested by Plato, and then we discussed that what kind of things are included in both of them. So I'm not going in those details again because we have already discussed them. So today I'm going to talk about the art, which is art imitation, which is explained by Philip Sidney. So he says that art is imitation. Now here in the third line, you can see that he says that nature is dull, incomplete. and ugly. Nature is dull, it's incomplete, and it's ugly. It is artists who turn dull nature into the golden color. Implies he implies, that means artist implies his creative faculty, imagination, and a style of presentation to decorate the raw materials of nature. That means when you will go to the natural to the forest, or you will see the natural beauty by yourself. So many a times the feeling you would have kind of feeling that the nature is dull. The nature is it's incomplete. The nature seems little bit ugly, but it's like ugly in a sense that if you will go in the desert and you will see, you will not find it really much attractive, but it is artist who makes it interesting, who fill it with colors, the golden colors. He fills fills it with the imagination, and with the presentation, with the presentation, and that artist decorate the nature with the raw materials. Like you have, if you have studied the alchemist, you see the alchemist, the large part of the alchemist is the setting of alchemist is in the desert. The large part of the alchemist is started in the desert areas. So you will find that there are the concept of deserts that you see when the alchemist was stopped by the tenth man, the chief ten men in the war, and they asked from alchemist that who are you? So he said that I'm going with this gentleman, and he has the power and ability to turn himself into the wind, into the storm. So they were surprised. So you see, whenever you read that scene, that is incredible. That how the man transferred himself into the desert, and then how there was a conversation between desert and the man, and the sand and the man, and the desert, but sand versus sand versus sky. You see, there is a excellent conversation, and whenever you, it is the beauty of artist, it is the beauty of his imagination, it is the beauty of Paulo Coelho's style of presentation, that how he decorated the nature with the raw materials, and how he decorated that desert with his golden color. So that means whenever you personally will visit the desert, you will find it kind of ugly. You will not, it will not be very much interesting to you. But when you study, when you will read the alchemist, then you will have entirely different perception about desert. So this is the beauty of artists. So the same thing is being said by the Philip Sidney, that Vida, he says that nature is dull, it's incomplete, and it's ugly, but it's artists who turn dull nature into the golden color. They these are the artists who actually use their faculty of imagination, and they use their style of presentation in order to decorate the raw materials of nature in a better way. So this is the uniqueness of artist. So this is the thing which is being discussed by Sidney Philip, and I hope if you are going to form alchemist, then this example will help you to understand that how nature is ugly, how it's dull and it's complete, but it is actually artist who completes it, who decorate the nature, who makes it more beautiful. The second is example which I'm going to quote is that whenever you will see, any scenery, natural scenery on the your cell phone or on computer or on TV, then that seems so much interesting. That seems so much beautiful. Why? Because it is artist who captured that scenery in that way. It is the imagination of artists to give a sound to that scenery, to give that specific sound to that scenery, and when you will be watching that video, then obviously you will be listening the sound as well. So the connection between that natural beauty and the sound would be very deep. when you will listen the sound, when you will watch the scenery, that scene, then that will encourage you, that will motivate you, and that will motivate you, and that will increase your interest in that thing, in that natural beauty. So you see, this happens because of the imagination and the skills of the artist. So the same thing is being done here. Now move further, but for Sydney, art is the speaking picture. For Aristotle, human action is more important, but for Sydney, nature is more important. You see, according to Aristotle, human action is more important. Whatever is being done by the human action, that has a lot of importance, and that is more important. But according to Sydney, the nature is more important. That how nature deals with us, the natural beauty is more important, and the law of nature is more important. So you see, he gives a lot of priority to the nature. So that's why he says that the art is the imitation of nature, because he connects everything with nature. He connects this universe with the nature. He connects this world with the nature, that this world must be the imitation of that world. This world must be the imitation of the nature. Like the Platonius said that hey, if you remember, I had discussed the concept of Platonius, that the world of here and the world of there. So you see, in that way, he's just saying that the nature is more important. Now move further, beta. Plato's philosophy and virtue is worthless at the battlefield. Let me highlight this idea: worthless at battlefield. You see, Beta, Plato, it is the philosophy of Plato about virtue. He was always very keen to teach virtue to every human being in this world. So he gave the philosophy of virtue. But when we talk about this philosophy, in terms of battleground, that the soldiers are standing against each other, and they are going to fight, and they are going to kill each other. So this philosophy would be worthless. It would have no impact on those people. And because uh, virtue is something that is very important, but at the battlefield the virtue cannot be followed. The people will not follow the virtue, even though in order to save themselves, even though in order to win the fight and to get a victory for their representative nation, they need to kill enemies. So if they follow the laws and the rules of virtue, then obviously they will die. So that's why this philosophy has less importance in the battlefields, but poet teaches men how to behave under all circumstances. That means the poetry is more important than philosophy, because philosophy is teaching something for a specific situations. As philosophy, the philosophy of virtue cannot teach you something for the battlefield. It cannot help you, but it is poetry which can teach you how to behave under all circumstances. So like when you will go through from epic poetry, then you will come to know that how kings used to fight and how they used to command to their armies, and you will get a lot of message from there. And you will come to know that how to behave in such kind of situations when there are the wars. And poetry can also teach you how to be a virtuous man. The poetry can also teach you how to be a wise man. The poetry can teach you how to understand the language of the divine, how to understand the powers of divine, and the natural beauty, and how to understand the laws of the nature. So you see, that means beauty, not beauty, but poetry can teach you a lot of things about so many different topics, and it can teach you how to behave under all circumstances of your life. If someone is sad, then it can teach you how to behave in that position, in that circumstances, in that situation. If someone happy, if someone is happy, then it can teach you that how to behave in that position are in those circumstances, in that condition. So that means poetry is more important than philosophy. Poetry has more importance than philosophy, and poetry can teach more than philosophy. So this is the concept of Sydney. Now, more important, the poet creates his own world where he gives only the inspiring things, and thus poetry holds its superior position to that of philosophy and history. That means poetry has more importance and it is more superior than the philosophy and the history. If you remember, I had told you the example about the history, that whatever has happened in the past, that is part of history, and the work of historian is to quote the history, that this is the thing which happened. But but the poetry has entirely different objects. Poetry can teach you that what should have been happened over there, how one could avoid the destruction. So you see there is a hail of difference. So that means in this condition the historian can lie if he is giving wrong facts and figures according to his own choice and personal interests. So that means poet is lie. So there are many chances, there are more chances for poet, for not poet but for a historian to lie, but poet does not lie. Poet has nothing, to hide or nothing to show. So actually, poet always deals with imagination. More importantly, poet had never claimed that his imagination is right or his imagination is correct. So, so poets never claim that. If they don't claim that, then how one can say that poetry is a lie? Poetry is not a lie. So in that way, poetry has more importance than the philosophy, like I told you, and the poetry has more importance than the history as well. Like historian got the chances to lie, but the poet does not get any chances to lie. So these are some different beliefs. Now, see, Vida, in these last 4 or 5 slides, I have tried to sum up all the concept of a take on the poetry by Stephen and then the defense of the poetry by Philip Sidney. So this is the summing up points with respect to their attacks on the poetry. So now the first is poetry is unprofitable. This is the attack by Stephen. He just said that poetry is the waste of time. Poetry is unprofitable. So it has no use. So let's sum up this argument, and it was the attack, but now we will discuss this is the defense by Sir Philip Sidney. So he says that no other branch of learning than poetry, then as poetry is more fruitful. I have written poetry twice, so let me remove it. No other branch of learning then as poetry is more fruitful branch of teaching and learning sensation. It says that if you will trace the ancient history or the history of ancient Greek and the history of Romans, then you would come to know that actually it was the poet and it was the poetry through which the education was being done there. Instructors, educators, they used to be poets and they used to write poetry. More importantly, these were the people who used to give education to their people. So it is the most important branch of transforming knowledge. So how one can say that poetry is unprofitable? Actually, it is the first source of knowledge. It is the first source of education, and it is the first source of getting light in the lives of human beings. That's why it has a lot of importance. It is not waste of time, but it makes the lives of people more wise and knowledgeable. Now, the second point is that it is most important way of getting knowledge about philosophy, logics, and mysteries of nature. That means if the one is the follower of poetry, then he can get a lot of knowledge about philosophy because philosophy is taught The philosophy is the thing which deals only one specific topic, but the poetry deals whenever the someone is reading the poetry, the poem about something, then it will help you to understand the philosophical logics behind that poet, behind that poem, and more importantly behind that event or the action which is quoted, which is portrayed in the poem. So it teaches philosophy, it teaches how to comprehend the logics, and it also teaches how to unveil the mysteries of nature, because the mysteries of nature are always unveiled by the poets, by the poetry, by the poems, not poetry, but by the poems. So that's why it is more important. It has power to teach and delight at the one place. That means it is the poetry which can teach you something, and at the same time, at the same place, it is delighting you as well. There is no any other form, superior form, which can teach you like the philosophy. If the philosophy is teaching you something, then that doesn't mean that it is delighting you. It will never ever delight you, but it can only teach you. But this is the uniqueness of poetry, that it is teaching you something, but it is also delighting you. More importantly, he just said that at the one place, and it can take readers to the virtuous actions. That means poetry encourages all the readers to go for the virtuous actions. Poetry always encourages its readers to do wise actions, to go for wise actions, to be a wise man, to go for good deeds, to not go for bad deeds. So, this is the prime purpose of the poetry, to encourage its readers to go for virtuous actions. And the final point here is that poetry is far better and effective than the history and philosophy. And I'm afraid we have already discussed it both points, that how poetry is more important than the philosophy and then the history. So this is very important. But I hope the first attack and the defense is understandable, understandable on your part. Now move further. The second is poetry is mother of life. This is the second attack which was done by the Stephen Gossin, and he just said that poetry is the mother of life. So the Stephen Philip, sorry, not Stephen, but Sir Philip Sidney answered this argument, this attack. Then he just said that poetry does not affirm anything as truth. So how can poetry lie? He just said that poetry can never ever claim that actually it is discussing something which is reality, which is real, which has connection with reality. Poetry doesn't say anything about its content. You will never ever read any poem which affirms that whatever is being discussed in the poem, it is real. So if the poem doesn't say that the content which is included in it, that is real, then how one can say that it is the mother of lies? Because it never says itself. The second thing, uh, the content which is included in the poetry, that is based on imagination. And even though the poets who compose poetry, they also claim that the whatever we have composed, that is based on imagination, and they never claim that their written work is real. So if the poet is not claiming, and the poetry itself is not claiming, then how one can say that the poetry is mother of lies? Because the poetry has nothing to do with lie and the truth, but actually it is based on the imagination. It is based on the feelings and the emotions of the people, and it has nothing to do with the lie and the truth. So therefore, one must not say that poetry is the mother of lies. And but it's a fiction, and the poet even claims that their written work is fiction, but they never claim that their written work is reality. So how we can say that? How one can say that the poetry is mother Allah? That means it is injustice which is being done with the poetry. More importantly, the poet should not be accused of lies, as poets deliberately never lie. Because sometimes it happens that if someone is reading a poem, and that poem is giving a message which is based on falsehood, but more importantly, according to Sir Philip Sidney, That falsehood is not quoted or portrayed by poet deliberately. He never tried to portray the truth or the falsehood or the lie, but actually poet always tried to portray the imagination, the concept of imagination and the fiction. So therefore, in some cases, it might be true that the fiction is related to the falsehood, but that doesn't mean poet has deliberately written that. It's unintentionally. So it has nothing to do with the reality, neither it has anything to do with the lie. So poetry is not mother of lies. And the second thing that is poetry leads to sinful behavior. Just he said that the poetry leads to the sinful behavior. So see beta here you need to understand this thing. The poetry itself is very noble. According to Sir Philip Sidney, he just said that the poetry itself is very noble. How the noble thing can lead human beings to a sinful behavior, it's impossible. More importantly, he just said that the one cannot the poetry cannot cause, sorry, the poet itself is very noble, that's why it cannot be caused, not if it cannot be cause of any moral corruption. It cannot be cause of any moral correction. So that means poetry has nothing to do with moral corruption, but poetry is based on false. Poetry is based on nobility. It is noble itself. So it can never ever corrupt the soul and the minds and the hearts of human beings. So it's not true. So it's a lie that poetry is corrupting the human souls. Apart from that, he just said that poetry aims at inspiring and elevating the souls of human beings. That means the prime purpose of the poetry is to inspire human souls, to elevate the human souls. And human beings are being inspired by the poetry, and then their actions become very virtuous, and then they become very wise men, and then they try to be very productive member of the society, and then they just try to go for the good deeds, and they are involved in good actions, not in the bad deeds. So it is also poetry which it is poetry which is abused. It is also poetry which is abused, not man abused by poetry. Actually, Stephen Gosin just said that the poetry is the one which abuses the man, which abuses the human soul, which abuses the human heart, and it leads to the sinful behavior. But here the answer is that the poetry actually being abused by the human being. There are some poets, and they are actually abusing the poetry. They are not writing poetry according to the rules and the regulations of the poetry, but they are abusing poetry. So that means poetry is being abused by human beings. Poetry is being abused by human beings, but human beings are not being abused by the poetry. So this is the difference with that. And now just saying that poetry always inspire human actions to be very noble, and the poetry can never ever encourage human beings to go for wrong deeds or to be involved in wrongdoings or to go for the to show their sinful behavior. And the second and the last thing in the attack and the defense of poetry is better. Plato banished poetry from his ideal world. It is the argument which is given by it is the charge or the attack by the Stephen Gossin, and he just said that Plato banished poetry from his ideal world. So Plato had banished, according to uh, the Philip Sidney, Plato had banished those poets who were corrupting the human soul, not poetry itself. Plato never ever banished poetry from his ideal world, but he actually banished those poets who were corrupting the minds and the hearts of and the soul of human beings. He banished that kind of poetry which was written by corrupt poets. That means he banished corrupt poets and the corrupt poetry written by them. He banished only them from his ideal world, but he never banished poetry from his ideal world, poetry itself. So this is very wrong interpretation of Plato's idea, which is presented in Republic. So this is the explanation which is given by Sophlipsidney. More importantly, Plato himself used to write in a poetic way. But if you have gone through from the work of Plato, then you will find that there is most of the written work of the Plato is written in the verse form, and the verse form always comes under the umbrella of poetry. So that means the Plato had a lot of influence of poetry on himself. He was influenced by poetry. So he did not banish poetry from his ideal world, but actually he banished that poetry which is written by the corrupt poets. So he banished them and their poetry from his ideal world, but he did not banish poetry itself from his ideal world. Plato said in his work, Ion. It is his work, ION. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but if I am making mistake, then please I apologize. So in his work, Plato just said that poets speak by divine inspiration. Poets always speak by divine inspiration. That means that there is the deep connection between poets and the divine inspiration. Divine always inspire poets to write something about them. If you are gone through from the poets of John Donne, from the poems of John Donne, then you can see that how he has written about divine and its power. See, there are also number of poems and the poets who have just written about the divine and the natural powers and supernatural elements, and the list goes on. So that means it is poet which is if the poet is not writing in a proper way and the poet is corrupt, so he will write the poetry. That poetry will corrupt the young generation, and then that poetry might corrupt the minds, hearts, and souls of human beings. So that's why Plato banished those poets from his ideal world. So see, beta, this was about the attack on poetry by Stephen Gossin, and then we discussed that how Stephen Gossin attacked on the poetry by on the basis of four different grounds. Then on the those same grounds, the Sir Sydney defended the poetry. More importantly, when we gone through from the defense of the poetry, then we came to know that beta, he actually got the idea or the inspiration from the Plato and Aristotle, because Sir Sydney seems biggest admirer of the Plato and Aristotle, and he got the idea that how Plato had done the poetry and then how Aristotle had defended the poetry. So he got a fair idea from that concept, and then he just answered. He just read the A Take on Poetry by Stephen Gossin, and then he just tried his best to answer all the charges of which were made on the poetry by Stephen Gossin. So I hope this is easy. I hope कि आप सबको समझ में आया होगा, and I hope कि I tried my best. I hope कि मैंने आपको अच्छे से समझाया होगा, and I tried my best to make you understand बेटा. If you fail to understand anything, then you are free to ask me questions regarding this topic. Now, see, beta, in this topic, we discussed a couple of important things, which were like in introduction, I just taught you that how what is the introduction of Sir Philip Sidney, and he belonged to the Renaissance, and specifically he belonged to the Elizabethan age, and you see, so you need to know this as well, and then we went for the background history, that how and why Sir Philip Sidney wrote this essay, because an apology for poetry is a literary essay and the complex essay. So this essay is written by Stephen by Sir Philip Sidney, and I just tried my best to explain you the background history, that why he got this encouragement to write this essay, to write this literary work in apology for poetry. So you need to understand this as well. And apart from that, beta, we just also discussed that the attacks on poetry are the charges on poetry done by Stephen Gorson. So you can see in the slide, I just told you that how Stephen Gorson has attacked on poetry on the basis of these four grounds, and here's little bit background given as well, that in which book Stephen Gorson has just attacked on the poetry. So it was the work, The School of Abuse, which was written by Stephen Gorson in 1579. So in his work, he just attacked on poetry on the basis of these four grounds, and these four grounds were the poetry is waste of time, poetry is mother of lies, it is the nurse of abuse, the Plato had rightly banished poets from his ideal world. So these were the four charges, the four grounds. These were the four charges. These were the four grounds on which Stephen Gorson has just attacked on the poetry. Then we studied and we discussed the poetry, the concept of poetry, which is given by the Sir Philip Sidney, and he divided poetry into two major forms. The first form is the divine poetry, and the social form is social utility of poetry. And these four points which are related to the divine form, and then we just discussed the how he just answers of charges. You see, in these four the part sub points of divine poetry, he has actually answered all the charges which were made by Stephen Gorson. So he answered all of the charges through the sub points of divine poetry. And then we just discussed the charges of Gorson poetry one by one. See, in this way, in this sequence, we also discussed that they were the first charge, and then we just discussed what is the defense of Philip Sidney. So in that way, we just discussed, and I tried my best to explain each and everything from very different angle and with different examples, and with deep explanation. I gave examples as well. So I hope कि अभी आपको समझ में आया होगा बेटा. If you fail to understand anything, and if you think that कोई चीज़ें ऐसी हैं जिन्होंने आपको बहुत आपको तंग कर रही हैं, आपको समझ में नहीं आ रहा है या कोई भी इशू है, तो बेटा फील फ्री टू कांटेक्ट मी. और बेटा दूसरी बात कि ये आपका बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक है और ये आपके कोर्स आउटलाइन के फाइनल टर्म के लिए इंक्लूडेड है. सो you need to go through from this topic very deeply and in details, कि आप लोगों को अच्छे से इसकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग हो जाए कि how to write how to comprehend each and everything which is present in this topic presented in this topic. So I hope कि आप और भी अच्छे से इसको पढ़ेंगे. मेरे एंड पे जो कुछ मैंने बताया, आपको एक्सप्लेन किया है, मैंने अपनी तरफ से पूरी कोशिश की, एंड आई होप आई एक्सपेक्ट सेम फ्रॉम यू, एंड आई होप के यू विल डू अ लॉट ऑफ हार्ड वर्क, एंड देन यू विल स्टडी, एंड you will give a good response to me in the physical classes. See you बेटा, अल्लाह हाफिज. अपना बहुत सारा ख्याल रखिएगा. See you on Monday. मंडे के दिन हमारी क्लास होगी फिजिकल. सो आई विल टॉक टू यू ऑन मंडे, एंड जो ये टॉपिक हमने पूरा डिटेल में डिस्कस किया है, तो हम इसको रिवाइज भी करेंगे क्लास में, इसके ऊपर डिस्कशंस भी करेंगे. अगर आप लोगों के कोई कन्फ्यूजन्स हैं, कोई क्वेश्चंस हैं, तो आप मुझसे वो अपने नोटबुक में लिख कर आ सकते हैं. देन यू कैन आस्क मी दोज क्वेश्चंस ऑन मंडे एज वेल. अल्लाह हाफिज, बाय बाय.